I got all my atoms and elements. Woohoo! Moving on at how that periodic table of elements is completely organized and divided into families and periods. All right, so if you guys look here, the next thing we're going to move on with the periodic table of elements. You already learned that the atomic number tells you how many protons and electrons when it's stable, if you're looking at it on the periodic table, how many of protons and electrons you have. And then if you look at the atomic mass, it tells you how much mass that the proton and neutron has in an average atom of that element. Okay, so now we're going to move on. Now that we understand how to read the individual elements, now we're going to go ahead and look at the periodic table elements and figure out what you would find as far as in the groups and families and what you would find in the period. All right, so groups and families, they are the numbers at the top. Okay, you will find those at the top of the periodic table that represents the number of electrons in the outermost shell. Okay, and when in your vocab you learned that the outermost shell is called a valence shell, and all it means is just the outermost shell. Okay, all right, so let me show you here on the periodic table what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the periodic table of elements. So the families or groups, okay, they are actually at the top. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, now if you guys look here, when we talk about groups and families, they go up and down. Okay, they're called vertical columns. Okay, so for example, if you look in group 1, hydrogen, lithium, sodium, potassium, and so forth, all of these in the first column, they have 1 electron in that outer shell, in the valence shell. Group 2, yep, they have 2. Group 3, they have 3 electrons in the outer shell. And then all the way up to group 8, they have 8 in the outer shell. Okay, so that's awesome because it tells you how many is in there. So like I said, this is just completely full of all kinds of information. All right. The next thing we have here is called the periods. Okay, now the periods are the numbers on the left of the periodic table that represents the number of shells that an element will have. Okay, so if you go back here, now over here on the left hand side, okay, those are called periods. Okay, all right, so if you look at the periods here, the periods, they are actually rows. They go across. All right, so in row 1, hydrogen and helium, they only have 1 shell. Lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon, they all have 2 shells in their outer, they have 2 shells around the nucleus. Number 3, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, you get the idea. Yes, they have 3. They have 4 shells. They have 5 shells. They have 6 shells. So you get the idea of how many shells they have. Okay? All right. Now, the next thing, and I'm going to show you how to use this. Okay? So the next part here is we have in the first shell, we have the very first shell outside of the nucleus. The most you can ever have is electrons, 2 electrons. Okay? That is the most that it can handle. The second shell, the most it can handle is 8 electrons, and that's it. The third shell, the most that it can handle is 8 electrons, and that's it. Okay? And then after that, depending on which type of area that the atoms belongs to, will determine how many it can have after the third. Transition metals, for example, they can have up to 18, but they're kind of a totally different ball of wax, and that's something you guys will learn in Sue Spin's class. Just in 8th grade, we're just going to keep it real simple. All right. So for your purposes, 8 is the most you can have in the outer shell after the first shell. Okay? All right, so here is your assignment for tomorrow. It says here you need to draw the following diagrams of elements with the following labels. I want you to draw carbon, nitrogen, and helium. What I want you to do is I want you to draw the number of protons, neutrons, and electrons along with the correct number of shells and electrons. Okay, so I'm going to do one with you right now, and I will show you how you do this. So let's go ahead and take a look. Let's look at lithium. Okay, lithium, I'm looking here, it has atomic number of 3. Atomic number tells me protons and electrons when it's stable. So it has 3 protons and it has 3 electrons. Okay, now the atomic mass number tells me how much mass that it has. So it's 7, and I know that protons and neutrons are the only subatomic particles that have mass, and I know it's protons plus neutrons there. All right, so I would take this number and subtract it from the known, which is your pronouns, which is 3. I'm sorry, protons. So I take 7 minus 3, and I would have 4 neutrons. Okay, and then how do I know how many electrons are in the outer shell? So remember, I said you had to look at the family or the group number at top. It's in family 1. So I know it has just 1. Okay, now how many shells does it have? Well, over here it's period 2. So it has 2 shells. So let me show you how you do this. All right, so we're going to go ahead and draw lithium. So this is what I want you to do. So here's a circle. So I said the atomic number was 3. So it has 3 poles and it has 3 electrons. But I can't put my electrons on there yet because I don't know how many shells it has. Well, looking at the periodic table, I see that it was in period 2, so I'm going to draw 2 shells. I know the most that I can have in that first shell is 2. Okay, and I know that the atomic number is 3, so I know I'm going to have 3 electrons. Now, how do I know that I put the electrons in the right place? Well, I know the first shell, the most it can have is 2 electrons, but how do I know that I have the right number of electrons in the outer shell? The reason why I know that I have the right amount is because when I look back here at the periodic table, it says that lithium is in group 1, and that means I only have 1 electron in the outer shell. So that's how I know that I did that right. Okay, so now the last thing I got to figure out is how many neutrons that it has. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at what I do know. I do know that it has 7. 7 is the atomic mass number. I know it has 3 protons, so 7 minus 3 is 4 neutrons. So therefore, it is 4 neutrons. Okay, so what I want you to do for home fun, okay, I want you to do exactly what I just did here, but I want you to do it for carbon, nitrogen, and helium. Okay, so make sure that you have carbon, nitrogen, and helium completed in the flip section of your notebook. Do your best and bring it back. Have a great night.